This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Christopher Lockhart, is Hollywood's foremost story professional. As story editor at WME, the world's largest diversified talent agency, Chris curates projects for A-list actors such as Denzel Washington. He reads and explores through piles of screenplays, magazines, books, old movies, TV shows, and he takes pitches from producers and writers in search of potential film projects. Chris began his career at International Creative Management, which is better known as ICM, where he worked as script consultant to the legendary talent agent Ed Limato, who represented industry giants such as Mel Gibson, Richard Gere, Michelle Pfeiffer, Liam Neeson, and Robert Downey Jr. Chris later moved to the venerable William Morris Agency, which eventually merged with Endeavor to form WME. As an educator and consultant, Chris has lectured around the world on the craft and business of screenwriting, and he's advised on countless feature films. Chris graduated from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts with an MFA in dramatic writing and was awarded the school's Public Service Prize for his dedication to public education. He's an adjunct professor at National University's Professional Screenwriting Program, and he's also taught at LA's Valley College and UCLA. His writing workshop, The Inside Pitch, was filmed for Los Angeles television, earning him an Emmy Award nomination. Chris's creative counsel has been used on many hit films, such as the 2016 Sundance Film Festival sensation, The Birth of a Nation. Chris crossed over into film producing with the cult horror hit The Collector in 2009 and its sequel, The Collection, in 2012, which opened in the top 10 box office. He also wrote and produced the award-winning documentary Most Valuable Players in 2010, which was acquired by the Oprah Winfrey Network. Chris is a member of the Writers Guild, the Producers Guild, and the TV Academy. I am truly honored to have as my guest on StoryBeat today the story master himself, Christopher Lockhart. Chris, welcome.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm curious. You are a story editor at WME. Can you describe for our listeners what a story editor at a major talent agency does? What do you do?
Well, it's sort of an antiquated title in some respects because it goes back to the earliest days of movie making. The story editor was the person, and I'm talking 100 years ago, who would find material, buy the material, rewrite the material, and then after the film was shot, would edit the material.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff for one person, huh?
Well, eventually Thomas Ince compartmentalized the way films would be made, and that really gave birth to the studio system. So eventually one person would acquire projects and one person would do the rewriting and one person would work out the contracts and someone else would edit the film and so on and so on. But so that's where the title originally comes from. And of course, you will see that title a lot in TV also. But that's just sort of a step title, on the way to being...
In TV, it's usually someone who's actually a staff writer of some kind, correct?
That's exactly right. Who then, and it's there are sort of quite a few levels as a new staff writer on the show elevates through the ranks, to eventually become a producer or who knows, even the showrunner himself.
Sure.
So there are probably no talent agencies anywhere that have a story editor. It is a title that you will see still at the studios, but not at talent agencies. However, the talent agent that I started to work for almost 20 years ago, Ed Limato, who passed away in 2010, he was an iconoclast, and he sort of had his own fiefdom within ICM. And so he created the position. And because he is sort of his own guy and did everything his own way, I sort of got to do my own thing in that position and really work in many ways like a development person would at a studio, but yet I'm doing it at a talent agency. So it's incredibly unique. And it does include having to read scripts, find material for a small stable of acting clients that I work with. I am not looking for material for the agency to represent,
really?
per se. That is not my job.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, that is not my job. My job is to find material, let's say, for Denzel Washington or for Rachel McAdams or for Ben Affleck. So that's my calling here, first and foremost.
But they're represented by the agency, correct?
They're all represented by, they're all clients. So I'm an internal creative executive, in a sense. I will also work with clients if they are, let's say, directing a film, or they're a writer-director. So you mentioned The Birth of a Nation, which was the Nate Parker film.
Right.
Nate Parker was a client for many years, and I got to work with him on early versions of his screenplay, consulting with him. And then after he shot the film, I spent some time with him in the editing room as well, sort of offering up my take on how the story was tracking and so on and so on. I'll often be called in if a client is unhappy with a film, doesn't like the final cut. I might have to go in and represent the client in the editing bay, trying to sort of work as a liaison somehow, some way to get the film to live up to the expectation of the client.
And so I was going to say,
it's a very diverse job.
It sounds very diverse. It sounds like you are involved literally from the beginning of someone approaching a star or director. You're from the beginning that you could take it all the way through to basically the release of the movie.
I could. It doesn't happen all the time, so I'm usually sort of called in often as, especially if it's after the movie has been made, I'm sort of a Hail Mary pass.
Wow.
In many ways. So if something's really not working and they've tried everything, and then, I'll sort of come in and hopefully I'll save the day. I always say, gee, why didn't you just call me in the beginning, and then, you wouldn't have had to have gone through all this.
Of course.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just better to be the Hail Mary guy.
Do you get a Hail Mary credit on movies?
I don't. I mean, sometimes, I get a special thanks. That's not my aspiration.
It's not part of the job description to be credited.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working. It's like I'm the guy who invented and I'm being very lofty in this comparison, but like I'm the guy at RCA who invented the TV set, and nobody knows who he is, and he never got a dime for it. Now, I'm not saying that my contribution is ever as important as that, but it's, when you are employed by a company, you're doing what is in your job description, and so I'm doing what it is that I get paid to do. And if a filmmaker wants to reach out and thank, he may. If he doesn't, I'm perfectly fine with that as well.
You are looking for diamonds in the rough all the time, yes?
Yeah, it's like when you're working with somebody like Denzel Washington, you're always trying to find material that is going to impress him and hopefully be his next movie. Now, he only makes 2 movies a year, let's say, like a lot of big movie stars. But still, my objective is to try to put as many good projects in front of him as possible. So, he has, a wide choice, rather than just one or two, and that can be difficult.
And how does this work? Does someone like a Denzel say to you, "Look, I'm looking for I want to play in a detective movie this coming year. Look for detective stories." How does it work?
Yeah, not typically. I think that one reason why a lot of these actors are movie stars is because they don't pigeonhole themselves. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been a time when I've been sort of given a directive, like, I've played a cop in the last 3 movies, so I don't want to play a cop in my next movie. I remember once Goldie Hawn called me, this was many years ago, and she said, "Sweetie, I so appreciate everything that you do, but can you stop sending me scripts about man-haters? I'm not a man-hater. I love men." So, that's what I did.
So
she actually didn't make a hit film after that for quite a while, I don't think. Regardless.
My assumption is that when she says that to you, that means that in your mind as the person looking for these projects, somehow there was something in them that she interpreted as man-hating movies, but you were seeing as something that she was right for. Am I correct to assume that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think a lot of this was after the success of the First Wives Club.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was in that. And was she in that? I'm hoping she was.
You would know better than me.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. But regardless, they're just... Also, too, I'm sent scripts. So, I'm sent scripts from producers and from coworkers, people who are saying, "Hey, I stumbled upon this. I think this might be great for somebody like Goldie. What's your opinion on it?" Now, I don't work with Goldie Hawn anymore, but that's the way that can work. I don't always have to do a whole lot of digging by myself. There's this massive team. I mean, that's the beauty of working at a big talent agency, is that there are lots and lots of people that are here to service the clients, and they're in every nook and cranny of this place.
Sure. And I would assume that the majority of the work that you see that comes across your desk is coming through WME. It's not coming from the outside, correct?
Well, it depends. In a sense, the majority of stuff is coming from the outside because it could be coming from a studio or a producer.
Sure.
But it's just that it might have been filtered through a coworker.
So it's not just WME writers or writer directors that are handing you stuff. It's coming from everywhere.
No. Oh, absolutely, sure. Because you'll get Steven Spielberg, who at least for film he's repped at CAA. For TV he's repped at WME. But he might have a film project and or a host of other writers and directors who might want to work with Denzel who are not repped here. And, you would really be doing a disservice to your client if the only projects that you ever sent him were from, clients repped at your agency. Of course, we always make that a priority because there's nothing that we love more than to package a project and to get everybody working and
Sure.
to create opportunities for everybody. That's always the objective. But it most certainly doesn't always work out that way.
Okay, so let's talk about scripts themselves. I know this is probably going to be a little hard to pinpoint, but when you're looking at scripts, I know you're looking for certain things that will stand out to you for various clients, but what are the elements, if you can speak to it, that make a script star-worthy? What is it that you see, what do you see that is star-worthy, and what do you see that certainly isn't, so that the listeners can get some idea how to create projects that are, more likely to get bought?
Right. Well, first and foremost, there is that sort of invisibility. It's that sort of esoteric element that I cannot speak to. It's just the thing. It's the X factor that you read in a script and you're like, okay, like this is good. But then there's other just very practical answers to your question. Things like, is the protagonist intriguing? Does he have an interesting dilemma? Does he have an interesting problem within the script to solve? Is he responsible for moving the story forward? Is he in the majority of the scene?
Mm-hmm.
Does she get all the good lines? Does she get all the good action?
Mm-hmm.
Too often I'll read a script and I'll be asking myself, why is the writer giving this scene to the supporting player rather than giving this scene to, the star of the movie?
Sure. Would you say that stars are very, very conscious of whether they are sort of driving the train or not?
Well, I don't want to generalize
Sure.
because, everybody has their own objectives, but I think a fair answer to that question is yes. But also, too, from a production standpoint, imagine paying an actor $20 million
Right.
and he's only in 60% of the movie?
Right.
That's ridiculous.
So you're looking mostly for character elements, like the characters are, they're definitely in the protagonist position in the movie. They're not going to be subservient. Or do you occasionally look for movies where an actor is actually not taking the prime position? Like frequently you'll see Bruce Willis in secondary roles. He likes to do that.
Right.
Do you look for those too?
Well, it depends. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm looking for that. But I would say that if it sort of comes my way, so I'll give an example, and this is maybe not exactly what you just described, but you look at a movie like Training Day.
Right.
Now, Denzel Washington is clearly the star of that movie, but the protagonist of that movie, the story is told through the eyes of the Ethan Hawke character.
Of course.
So he is the protagonist. Denzel is not the protagonist. But you read that script and you're like, okay, wow, this is actually a pretty good role. By the way, I should point out that script actually came to me from Mel Gibson.
Really?
Yeah, it did not come to me for Denzel Washington.
That's interesting.
Part of what's great about when you work with a stable of big actors and actresses is that material will come for one, and then you might be able to do a bait and switch, So the script was lured into you because they want to get Mel Gibson involved, and then you're like, well, Mel's busy, or Mel's already made, some incarnation of this movie before, or, it might be better for this person, so why don't we see if we can pull a sleight of hand in some ways. We did that with the movie Taken. Interestingly enough, is that it came to me for Mel Gibson, and Liam Neeson was also on our roster, and we just managed to, this was the magic of Ed Limato, he just managed to create a desire in the producers for Liam Neeson, and so, that happens actually a lot.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that Ed Limato actually contrived to make it Liam Neeson's movie?
Well, he that's what agents do.
Wow,
agents,
that's great. That's really cool.
That story can probably be told, 80,000 different ways in this town. That's what you do. So, and you are in that position when you have. So if you represent Tom Cruise, you're getting every single major script in town that needs, a male character like him.
Sure.
You're seeing everything. And then if you also happen to represent other actors in the Tom Cruise vein, like, Leonardo or, Ben Affleck or, whoever, it's just a show game.
Okay, so I'm a screenwriter, and I'm being, using the big me, or we, not just me personally, and I want to get a script to a particular star. Is there a way to do that, or is it not possible unless your representative is well connected?
Well, the answer is yes and no,
Well,
and of course.
I want to clarify that. I mean through you. I don't mean just in general throwing it over their fence. I'm talking about how do they get to you so you can read it and vet it.
Well, it usually needs to come to me through some respectable channel.
You've already had, in other words, before it gets to you, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that it's already been through some form of vetting before it even gets to you.
Usually, but not all of the time, because often, there could be a script that the studio wants to get some actor attached to, and it comes like hot off the presses. I remember when we worked with Mel, like M. Night had just finished, his like draft of Signs, and it gets like shuffled over to my office immediately, and nobody read that before me, but he was M. Night Shyamalan, so so there are scripts that have not been seen by other eyes or not by a lot of eyes, and then there are scripts that absolutely have been seen, maybe sometimes by like thousands of people before it even gets to me, potentially.
But generally speaking, if you were if you're a writer, you're not represented by WME, and perhaps you're not even represented by one of the more powerful agencies. It still has gone through some vetting in order to get to your desk, unless you say it's someone who's iconic, like an M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, or it's like my mother calls me to say, "Oh, Christopher, I met this lovely lady on a cruise, and her son writes screenplays."
Have you actually had anything produced that way?
No.
Well, there may be a good reason for that.
Yes, I would agree.
When you receive a script, has it usually gone through some form of coverage, or are you seeing mostly scripts that have not been covered?
It's a little bit of both. It could be, I'd say maybe 50-50. Because, often, for example, all of these actors have agents. And so their agents are the ones that are, often trying to find potential material. So I work with, for example, the agent of Denzel Washington. His name is Andrew Finkelstein. I work very closely with him. And so, he's out and about, and he's doing lunch, and, somebody might say to him, "Hey, Andrew, there's this great script that was on the blacklist like 3 years ago. Has it like ever come your way? I think it would be great for Denzel, or I think it might be great for this person." And then, he gets a copy of that script, and he sends it to me. So
if you have not seen a breakdown or a coverage of some kind, will you do one?
First of all, I try never to read coverage before I read something.
Very interesting.
Because I'm going to have to read it anyway.
Right.
I have to read it anyway. I have to read it because I'm sort of working as a creative liaison for a client, and so I need to be able to educate the agent. I need to be able to educate the client, and so I have to be intimately familiar with the material. So I read everything from beginning to end. I have to.
And how often do you get scripts that you're 10 pages in and you go, "This is not for anybody," and it gets put aside? Does that happen often?
No, I can't put anything aside, because even if I realize by page 1 that it's awful, I have to read the whole thing, because it's possible that client is going to be meeting with that writer for whatever reason. Who knows why?
Right.
And that's not me. That's not for me to judge. And so I have to do my job, which is to read the entire thing and educate the agent and the client so they are prepared for whatever they need that information for.
So you're actually going to form some kind of an opinion, whether verbally or in writing, to communicate to the agent and the actor that this script is for you, it's not for you, it's whatever
Yes,
you
correct.
read it.
Yes.
Okay.
Always.
So in other words, it's not just a matter of reading and having a phone call. You actually do work beyond that.
Absolutely. So, and it depends. Sometimes it's just as simple as a memo. Sometimes I write a report, that includes a synopsis and includes a log line and includes comments. Sometimes I'll do notes on a script. This week, actually, this entire week, in fact, when I finish hanging up with you, I've been meeting with a client all week. Nicholas Jarecki, he's a writer, director. He directed Richard Gere in Arbitrage.
Sure.
And he's currently preparing his new script for his next film, and I've been working with him all week on that. So he's been in here, and we're working from usually like 10 a.m. until about 8 p.m. And so, now I'm working in that capacity. So I'm not actually writing anything down. Instead, I'm just dealing one-on-one with the client.
Mm-hmm. Do the agents at WME send you their writer clients for work? Not for work, but for analysis or help or suggestions?
I work with, again, I have a stable of clients, so I don't work with everybody at the agency. It would be impossible to do that anyway, So, listen, you work with somebody like Denzel Washington, there's enough material for a full-time job. I have
sure.
a full-time job just with him.
I'm sure.
And then yet there is also looking at material for people like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon and Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman and Rachel McAdams and Richard Gere and Steve Martin and Jake Gyllenhaal and Ryan Reynolds. And so it's, that's enough.
What kind of patterns do you see coming across your desk in terms of scripts that you just see patterns of it where it's like, okay, enough, we don't need these kinds of stories anymore? Do you see those kinds of patterns?
I'll tell you this. I wouldn't say that because there can always be that one script.
Of course.
That
knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, exactly, within that pattern. So I think part of the reason why I've been in my job so long is that I am incredibly open-minded about stuff, I'm not like a curmudgeon that sort of sits behind his desk, if I read one more of these scripts, that's just, I am as enthused today, 19 years later, than when I was first hired by Ed Limato, as I was that first day in 1998.
Well,
so
having met you recently here in Pittsburgh, I can tell you that there's no question you're one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever met. So you really like what you do.
Yeah, it's I never thought that maybe I would, but yeah, I really enjoy looking at screenplays and sort of taking them apart, and I enjoy sharing my opinion. I also enjoy working with people who know a lot more about this, and somebody like Nick Jarecki is just this, he's this brilliant young man, and he has very strong opinions on things, and as do I, and he gives it back to me just as hard as I might have to give it to him, and I like that challenge.
So I would imagine, of course, not having ever actually worked with you, but I would imagine that it's actually fun to work with you, that you bring a lot to the table that way.
Well, I'd like to think so, but I don't know. Some people might be like, this guy's an ass.
Well, that's true for everyone, isn't it, Chris?
I guess.
So you're quite highly regarded and respected as a master of the pitch. Let's talk about pitching for a while, because I know it's one of the great mysteries for most writers. Is what makes a pitch great for you? How do you form a pitch?
Well, I think what makes a pitch great is that it gets you excited for a movie. You hear the pitch and you're like, wow, I want to see that movie. I want to see that TV show. that it motivates me enough to want to have to share that pitch with somebody else.
And how do we get there? How does a writer take their story that may not be that great and make it sound exciting? Are there tricks?
Gee, I wish I could say that there were, but to be honest, you can't trick somebody like me because, I've read probably closing in on 60,000 screenplays. I've heard
all?
Thousands. Yeah, that's all. And the number continues to spin. I'm like McDonald's. And I've heard lots and lots of pitches, and I've read a lot of coverage, and I've seen a lot of log lines. So, when a person is pitching to me, it only takes me, a few moments to figure out sort of what's there, what's not there, and I know how to ask just a couple of pointed questions to sort of know exactly what's happening. So it really, before the pitch, it really comes down to the story. It really comes down to having a good, well thought out story. Because if you don't, then people who listen to a lot of pitches are going to see right through it. So there's no shortcut to having a good pitch. It really starts with having a good story. Now, very experienced screenwriters often get to pitch story ideas that do not yet have a screenplay. And then inexperienced or new writers are often pitching screenplays that they've already written in order to motivate people to read them. Either way, you really want to feel confident that the writer has thought his story through. Of course, if the script has not yet been written, there's always a little bit of latitude there. To be able to say, well, I don't know if that's working, but could you do this or could you do that? But when a screenplay's already written and somebody's asking you to take 2 hours out of your weekend to read it, and so they're pitching it to you, and then you're sort of hearing the flaws, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know, this doesn't sound like it's working for me, and I don't know if I want to take 2 hours out of my weekend when I could spend that time with my son. So it's like if you want me to do the work, then you better have done the work.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, as you know, I've got a lot of TV credits as a writer, and I would say that the one part of my game that I've never quite felt the most comfortable with is the pitching part of it. And I know that if I'm going to really try to sell something, I have to work 3 times as hard as one might think in order to write something that's 5 minutes long, or to present something that's 5 minutes long or less, or 30 seconds long. That really takes a lot of work to make it concise and carry the story and all the rest of it. And I'm sure you're correct that if a story's not worked out at all, pitches tend not to be so great unless you're just a master of telling those kinds of pitches.
Right, and the thing is I think that people really pitch all the time, and they pitch constantly. It may not be a screenplay, but you're pitching other stuff, on a regular basis. Like maybe you tell somebody about this great restaurant that you went to and that, you would like them to go. And so you sort of make the pitch. So it's something that we do on a regular basis, but we don't think about it and we're not self-conscious about it until we have to do it for a screenplay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but then, all of a sudden, everything sort of seems to just shift and change for the writer, and then he just has a hard time doing it. I think one error that writers often make is that they just tend to tell too much in a pitch.
Can't get to the heart of the story is not there. It's everything.
It's everything, and it becomes hard to follow, and it becomes sort of soporific, and you're just like checking out. So, the idea of pitching is in a sense, it's sort of like a trailer for your movie. You're trying to present the major elements of the story and character, at least at first. You might eventually begin to, go in and do, more micro offering on stuff. But I think that when you hear somebody say, Okay, so I'm going to pitch my romantic comedy for you. It starts early on a Saturday morning. Mary shuffles out of bed, her slippers on the floor by her feet, and you know that this person is going to be like a 9-hour pitch, and he's telling the story rather than pitching the story. And I get that all the time. Now, listen, there are some occasions where a writer might have to tell the story from beginning to end. I did a pitch with my former producing partner, Julie Richardson. We were at Paramount, and we were pitching an idea that we were going to produce, and we wanted Paramount to buy the pitch, and then they would, of course, hire a writer. So we didn't have a screenplay. So we really had to present the story so they could understand it from beginning to end, because there was no screenplay for them to refer to.
Sure.
So in some cases, you might actually have to do, a very specific telling of the story. But most of the time, you don't have to.
Well, most of the time, it should be concise. You shouldn't have to tell anything more than just the current. Spielberg himself has famously said that he knows he's got a story that he can work with when he can hold it in the palm of his hand. He can tell it to you in 1 line or 2 lines tops. And I think that's really the key. Another thing, one of my professors at UCLA and a very dear friend, Howard Suber, who's written a lot of great stuff, a lot of books about how to do this, he often says when a person comes up to you after a movie and says, "What do you think of the movie?" and they say, "What was it about?" He says they're usually what they want to know is what's the conflict. It's not always about the star or the character, other than what are the conflicts that those characters are in. So
yeah, the thing that's always interesting to me is that when I often ask writers, "So what's your story about?" And they'll say, "Oh, it's about lost love. It's about how we wander through our lives looking for something that we've already had."
No.
And like, no. I want to know the story. I want you to tell me who the protagonist is, what it is that he wants, what he struggles for, and what's in his way. I mean, I want to hear those actual mechanics. I don't need to hear sort of, your thematic rendering. That's what people do. In fact, if you watch talk shows, most of the time when the host asks the actor, let's say, who's doing the press junket, "So what's it about?" They won't usually say, "Oh, it's a story about this distraught psychiatrist who struggles to help a young boy overcome bizarre affliction. The boy sees dead people. It's called The Sixth Sense." That's not what they do, It's always some like thematic, poetic presentation of like subtext and stuff. And I'm like, no. Tell me what it is that I'm going to see in the movie. And then hopefully, by your telling me that, I am going to be able to extrapolate all that other poetic stuff, all by myself, without you even having to tell me. I'm going to be able to feel the emotion without you even having to tell me.
I would say to do that and do it well actually takes time to develop that skill. I think that's a craft or a skill thing.
Well, just like writing a screenplay.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
no different. That is also a craft. And I always tell writers, they often don't like to hear this, but I say, you're not a writer. It's like if you want to write screenplays, you're not a writer. You're a craftsman. Because it's far more important that you understand how to construct a script and write a script. It's not a novel where you're being judged on your mellifluous prose. That's not a screenplay. Because what you write on the page, the actual words, your word choice, doesn't matter. We don't see it on the screen. That all gets interpreted by the actor and the directors and the cinematographers. So it's not about that. This is why some of our greatest writers couldn't write screenplays.
That's
it has
true.
nothing to do with writing.
It's architecture. It's a kind of building that a novelist doesn't have to do. Novelists can just continue to carry an idea forward for a very long period of time and meander all over the place and not stay on track. But a screenwriter has to be like a shark. They have to swim very straight ahead and constantly hunting for some little nuggets. It's a different thing. It's a totally different thing. So
totally different thing.
You're also, as we said in the opening, you're also a producer. When you're looking for stuff that you want to produce, is it just personal feelings, or do you look for something that might be commercially viable? What do you think of when you're trying to produce something?
Well, let's say that I have produced. It's not necessarily something that I aspire to do on a regular basis. Being a producer is really, really hard, and
to say the least.
If I had my druthers, I would do nothing but produce documentaries, actually. And the reason that I don't is because I've done one, and it was very incredibly satisfying for me. But it was tough in the aftermath. It was tough doing the film festival route, trying to find distribution. Well, we got incredibly lucky when Oprah Winfrey fell in love with the movie. But prior to that, it was like, we were in some rough waters. And I sort of have bizarre taste when it comes to documentaries, and so I understand. I'm like, it's like I go off and do that and, find people and make a documentary for $500,000 and then maybe never make any money off of it. That is what I would really love to do, but I'm just feeling so cushy in my job, And of course, I can, always do that. Now, the other films that I made were horror movies, and that sort of came about altogether through sort of happenstance and kind of like through who you know. One of the writers happened to be my intern at ICM at the time, but I sort of felt like this is a really good concept that could be easily sold. It's in a genre that is sort of more easily distributed than other genres.
Sure.
And so for me, those movies were much more about kind of a practicality, a more practical approach to try to experience what it means to produce. When I did my documentary, that was much more pie in the sky.
Did you find one more personal than the other?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which is why I would prefer to do documentaries, because it's really personal. Anybody who's ever made a documentary, at least anybody that I know, they fall in love with their subject, and not only that, but I guess it depends. Like if you're making a documentary about John Wayne Gacy, I guess maybe you don't fall in love with him, or maybe you do. I don't know. But
there's all kinds out there, aren't there, Chris?
Yes, there are. But generally speaking, that's why I like documentaries. And also what's sort of interesting is I think because I deal so much in fiction, I'm reading so much fiction film all the time. And I often think to myself, wow, there's so many fascinating real stories out there. Why are we always telling stories that are made up? And I think that's why I like documentaries so much, oddly enough. And I really think it's because I read so much of what's not real.
Well,
if that makes any kind of sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. When you have, assuming you ever do have free time, and you can pick and choose something that you're going to just sit back and watch, do you prefer to watch reality or news as opposed to watching another TV show or a movie?
I do see a lot of films. I see a lot of movies. And I have to because that's my job. I don't watch a lot of television. That I will admit to. I don't watch a lot of TV. In fact, I don't even have cable. I actually just have Netflix and Amazon Prime. And
Interesting.
That's it. But yeah, like when I'm on Netflix, I'm watching House of Cards, and I'm watching Orange Is the New Black. But then otherwise, I'm always looking for a documentary to watch. I would always prefer to watch a documentary, like The Keepers, which is this serial documentary that's on Netflix right now.
Mm-hmm.
So so I would tend to gravitate toward that.
You're cleansing the palate because you are so overwhelmed by
you could be right
stories.
about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So okay, so you've obviously worked with and met tons of very interesting people over time. I'm not looking for you to reveal any sources, names, or anything else, but I'm curious if you could maybe share one really funny oddball story that's happened to you over time.
I'll tell the story, but I'll leave the name out.
Please do.
Okay. So I had a client who was meeting with a very big director on a project that the client had not read the complete screenplay for. So he sits down with the director at a restaurant, and the director starts to talk about the script, and the actor, realizes that he's very unprepared for this conversation. So he gets up, and he excuses himself, and he goes into the bathroom, and he calls me. And he's asking me about the story, and I'm pitching it to him so he sort of understands. And he's like, okay, so tell me, like, I only read the first 30 pages, so what happens in, the final 90 pages, and why aren't I doing this movie? And while I'm telling him this, he's relieving himself. And it's echoing. It's like an echo chamber.
And again, without names, this is a famous person, yes?
At that time, he was one of the most. He was the most famous actor in the world. And I was like, wow, cool. I have other stories too, but something, we're going to reserve those for when we have that pot roast, just me and you together.
I just wanted one. We'll get that pot roast one of these days. I just wanted one good. So, two last quick questions here. You obviously worked for Ed Limato for quite some time. What can you lend any insight in working with someone like that would be useful for someone who's looking to be in the business? Did he have a particular philosophy, or did he come at things a certain way, or lend you a specific philosophy? What would that be?
He did, and coincidentally, it sort of bears on what it is that I do. I'm sorry, but my other line is ringing. I hope it doesn't.
That's all right.
Create a problem. So he believed in the screenplay. That, to him, everything was about the screenplay. That's why he needed a story editor. That was why he needed somebody like me, because he believed that more than anything, the screenplay would make the star.
That's great. And obviously correct. He's dead on with that. So,
he was, he knew, he got it. He understood. He really did.
So, okay, well, that leads me to our last question. We're wrapping this up. This has been just spectacular stuff. I've been speaking with the great Christopher Lockhart, who works at WME, finding stories for big famous people to make movies that we will all enjoy. And I'm wondering, Chris, if you have perhaps one good bit of advice of your own to people trying to get into the business, things they should do or not do, or what would help them to make their career happen?
I think I wish I had something really wise and specific.
I bet you do.
Quotable to say, but I really don't. I think that what's most important is the work. I think it's very easy to get wrapped up in what people, deem to be the glamour of Hollywood and, stardom and celebrity and money. But Steve, and I know that there isn't a whole lot of that.
Nope.
And it's really all about the work. you have to be in this because you really love to write. I have a friend who says, you become a writer because you cannot do anything else. If there's anything else you can do, then you should do it. This is all about the work. Don't worry about being a star. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about trying to prove to your unappreciative parents that you can do it. Just do the work.
I think
and
that
then
is...
And then if the work is good, then hopefully somewhere along the line it will intersect with the dream. And then, you might very well get all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have done the work. And too many people just don't want to do the work.
No, they look at a movie or a TV show and they think that looks easy, I can do that, and then they get into it and find out, wait a minute, this is a lot harder than it looks, and they don't want to do it.
You know what Nick Jarecki calls it? You know what Nick Jarecki calls it last night? He said, this is rocket science.
Interesting.
It's like, it is rocket science. Often we might say, come on, guys, you're writing a screenplay. It isn't rocket science. He said, it is rocket science.
It's very daunting, and I'm glad to hear you say that it's about the work, because I say this to my students all the time. You're going to need to write thousands of pages before you're going to feel like you understand what you're doing, and they look at me like I'm out of my mind, but I know that to be a fact certain, and there is only the rare savant who comes along in a generation who just naturally at the age of 21 is a gifted writer. It takes a long time and a lot of pounding of keys.
And this is why it is imperative that this is something that you want to do.
Yeah.
Because this town doesn't tolerate dilettantes. You really can't be a part-timer. You really have to put everything into it, because there are many people with a great amount of talent who are putting 100% into it. And if you're only sort of marginal at your craft and you're only putting 20% into it, then nothing's going to happen anyway. So it is first and foremost always about the work.
I think that's very wise advice. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I greatly thank you for stopping by StoryBeat today and allowing me to pick your brain, and I greatly appreciate your taking the time.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Steve. I enjoy your company very much, whether it be over dinner or over the phone, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Well, thank you, Chris. Have a great day.
Thank you, Steve.
Today's StoryBeat tip. When an architect designs a new building, he or she works it all out on paper or on computers, in scale models, and via other forms of speculative display. But none of that preliminary design work is the building itself. Those activities are merely the creation of plans that will, eventually, lead to the construction of the building. Most architects don't actually build anything. Contractors and construction companies do the heavy, labor-intensive work. But if you have ever been around construction, then you know that no matter how precise the plans may be, most contractors will make what are known as field changes in order to complete the work in an efficient, timely manner. The carefully considered plans of the architect will be altered in order to facilitate the completion of the project on time and within budget. A screenplay is nothing more than a blueprint that various contractors like a director, cinematographer, editor, actors, producers, etc. follow and make field changes to, sometimes significantly so. In short, think of screenwriters as the architects of screen stories. The screenplay is not the finished work. The finished work is the movie, much like the architectural plan is only complete after the building is built. While screenplays are an indispensable part of the movie-making process, and I do challenge you to make a commercial movie without a screenplay, good luck to you, they are not the end-all and be-all. A novel is the end product. A screenplay is not. This is why screenplays are not usually thought of as a precious, sacrosanct thing. As such, it requires a great degree of faith on the screenwriter's part that the other artists will do their best. As the screenwriter, you must learn to let go of your baby. The end product may not always meet your grand standards or what you had in your mind's eye, but that is the process. Like an architect, learn to relinquish your work, for once it has left your hands, it will no longer be yours and yours alone. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.